Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. At 4 a.m. on the outskirts of Melbourne, a muffled sound of breaking glass echoed through a private home. The neighborhood was still, the streets empty, and the brief noise went unnoticed. A few minutes later, the house remained quiet, until a mother opened the door to her daughter's room and saw something that would forever change their world. The young woman had returned from work the night before, shared dinner with her family, and gone to bed, ready for a normal day. But someone decided otherwise. What drove this person to pick up a knife and cross that threshold? Why did a year of distress signals go ignored? And was there any chance of preventing what happened? Celeste Mano was born on November 22, 1996 in Italy. Her family immigrated to Australia when she was still young, hoping for a more stable life and better opportunities for their children. Settling in Melbourne, Celeste's parents managed to create a warm, close-knit environment in which the future college student grew up and found her identity. Celeste was the youngest child in her family. Besides her, there were two older half-brothers and a younger brother. Despite the age differences, the siblings shared a caring, trusting relationship. She was raised in an atmosphere of love and attention, yet she remained independent and self-reliant. From an early age, she demonstrated deep empathy, showing concern for those who felt alone, making new friends and helping her peers with schoolwork, qualities she carried into her teen years. She attended Labour Secondary College, where teachers described her as thoughtful, responsible, and genuinely interested in others. After high school, Celeste enrolled at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, RMIT, pursuing a double major in forensic studies and psychology. Her goal was never academic prestige, but providing practical support to people in difficult circumstances. From the start of her studies, Celeste saw herself as a counselor ready to listen and support someone in crisis. After earning her degree in 2020, Celeste understood that starting a private practice would take time and resources. In the interim, she took a position at Serco, a large telecommunications and outsourcing company not directly related to her chosen profession. She started as a standard customer service operator, but within weeks she was promoted to team leader. Management recognized her organizational skills, clear thinking, ability to defuse conflicts, and talent for maintaining positive team morale. Colleagues admired her for her kindness, attention to detail, compassion, and willingness to listen. They respected her, not for the title she held, but for how she treated people. Despite her busy schedule, Celeste remained deeply engaged with professional literature, staying up to date on the latest developments in psychology. She often reflected on her future practice, keeping her long-term goals close to heart. For a long time, Celeste's personal life took a back seat. That changed in 2020 when she met Chris Ridsdale, a peer with whom she quickly formed a warm and sincere bond. Their relationship developed naturally, free of drama, giving Celeste a rare sense of stability and inner peace. She told those close to her that she finally felt happy. She had a job she loved, the unwavering support of her family, and someone by her side with whom she could envision a future. This sense of harmony felt like the beginning of a new chapter, a stable and grounded adult life. But Celeste had no way of knowing that a moment of kindness and openness toward a former co-worker would quietly spark a dangerous chain of events. Luai Nader Sako was born in 1985 in Iraq, during the regime of Saddam Hussein. In the early 1990s, when he was about 7 years old, his family fled the country, seeking safety and a better future. They eventually settled in Roxburgh Park, a northern suburb of Melbourne. Luai was the eldest of 5 siblings. Relatives recalled him as a caring son and brother. During his school years, he blended in with his peers and did especially well in subjects like math, showing an aptitude for analytical thinking. As he moved into his teenage years, Luai began to exhibit early signs of social withdrawal. He became more introverted, often choosing to be alone, and struggled with connecting to others his age. He had few, if any, lasting friendships. His academic performance began to suffer, and he found it difficult to fit in either at university or in social settings. His attempts at employment were sporadic, limited to short-term gigs, and he was unable to hold down a consistent job. Each failed job opportunity left him feeling deeply humiliated. Over time, these repeated setbacks contributed to a growing sense of hostility toward the world around him. One event in particular had a lasting impact on Luai's worldview, a tragedy involving his younger brother. In 2008, Lauren Sacco, who was 18 at the time, was involved in a confrontation outside a Melbourne nightclub. Alongside a friend, he assaulted a young man, who later passed away from the injuries. Lauren accepted responsibility for the act and was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, receiving a 6-year sentence. The case was a major blow to the entire family. Though Luai was not directly involved, he was deeply shaken by the shame, the public scrutiny, and the legal proceedings. The trauma left a lasting scar. By the time Luai turned 30, he still had no stable job and no experience in romantic relationships. He lived in near isolation, with minimal social contact, and his outlook on life began to shift in disturbing ways. He didn't see himself as the problem. On the contrary, he increasingly viewed himself as a victim. He felt constantly rejected, convinced that others were handed opportunities and happiness that he was unfairly denied. That belief only deepened with each failed job interview and work dismissal. In April 2018, he was hired at Serco, the same company where Celeste would later work. For Luai, this job offered a glimmer of hope, a chance to prove himself. But after a year, he was let go again, not due to personal conflict, but for underperformance. Still, for Luai, it felt like betrayal. He took the dismissal as a blow to his self-worth, and his refusal to acknowledge his own shortcomings only intensified the pressure building inside him. It was during this time that his fixation on Celeste began. Unlike him, she was young, confident, respected, and surrounded by others. She had achieved the recognition he had chased for years. And more importantly, she had shown him kindness, simple, professional warmth, and empathy. But Luai misread those gestures as something deeper, interpreting her courtesy as a personal connection. That misunderstanding became the spark for his growing obsession. By the time he was dismissed from the company, Luai's grip on reality had begun to loosen. He had never sought psychological help and had no official diagnosis, but his behavior was becoming increasingly concerning. He didn't see himself as someone exhibiting aggressive behavior. In his mind, he was the one who had been wronged, denied a chance at happiness. Over time, this internalized sense of injustice turned into a belief that the world owed him something, and anyone who denied him that was part of the problem. Celeste became, in his mind, the embodiment of everything he could never have. In June 2019, Luai Sacco was officially terminated from Serco following a management decision. The reasons were procedural: low performance scores and failure to adapt to role expectations. There had been no personal conflicts or disciplinary issues. The separation process followed standard protocol. He was given notice, completed an exit interview, turned in his ID badge, and was escorted off the premises. At that time, Celeste was serving as a team leader, and as part of her responsibilities, she accompanied Luai to the exit. In the parking lot, she maintained her usual composed and courteous demeanor. She wished him well and said goodbye. However, Luai crossed professional boundaries when unexpectedly, he leaned in and kissed her on the cheek, an act that was not reciprocated or appropriate given their working relationship. Celeste was caught off guard but remained composed. That evening, She told her mother what had happened, noting that the gesture made her uncomfortable. She couldn't understand what had led him to believe such a move was acceptable. She had never flirted or encouraged any personal connection. To her, Luai's behavior felt inappropriate and unsettling. A few days later, Luai began messaging Celeste on Instagram. On the surface, the messages didn't contain threats or direct pressure, but their tone was unexpectedly personal and emotionally intense. They resembled romantic confessions more than casual communication. He described his feelings as overwhelming, deep, and all-consuming. Considering that their prior interactions had been minimal and strictly professional, the sudden shift felt inappropriate and alarming. He wrote that she had changed him, that he couldn't stop thinking about her, and that she was constantly on his mind. In one of his first messages, he claimed that her refusal to engage with him was ruining his life, that he couldn't eat, work, or sleep. He referred to what he was experiencing as a painful attachment, even calling it an addiction. Celeste was caught off guard. She hadn't anticipated this kind of personal outreach following a standard workplace dismissal. Despite the awkwardness, she replied with as much professionalism and kindness as possible. In her response, she thanked him for the kind words, but clearly stated that she had always seen him strictly as a colleague. She explained that she didn't have any personal feelings for him beyond professional respect, and she wished him all the best moving forward. Her message was brief, respectful, and left no room for misinterpretation. But Luai's reaction to her response was troubling. Rather than accepting her message, he continued writing. His messages became more persistent. He admitted he realized how overwhelming his emotions were, even confessing that they were starting to scare him. But he also insisted he couldn't help himself. He used phrases like, "This is stronger than me," "I can't stop thinking about you," and "You're the only person who matters." Celeste realized her polite response hadn't worked. She stopped replying, but the messages kept coming. Luai began sending long, emotionally intense monologues, his tone swinging from adoration to feelings of rejection. At first, he apologized for being intrusive, insisting he didn't want to make her uncomfortable. But soon, he reverted to trying to elicit sympathy, pouring out his emotional distress and saying how much he longed for her attention. He wrote that he would do anything just to be noticed, and that he was suffering from the lack of a response. This marked the first clear indication of a growing psychological threat. Luai's behavior was already crossing boundaries, even if it hadn't yet turned aggressive. For Celeste, it became increasingly clear he wasn't taking her words seriously. He ignored the boundaries she had set, refused to accept her right to say no, and disregarded her personal space. At that point, Celeste hadn't contacted law enforcement. She still believed the situation might fade with time and hoped that if she stopped engaging, Luai would eventually move on. Still, a sense of unease had taken root, and she began sharing her concerns with those close to her. What she didn't know was that his obsession wasn't fading. It was growing stronger and taking a more dangerous form. In the months that followed, Luai's activity escalated. He sent more than 140 messages to Celeste from multiple accounts. Each time one of his Instagram profiles was blocked, he created a new one and continued messaging her. He told Celeste that he had never felt this way about anyone before. He claimed she had given him hope, insisted there was something meaningful between them, and begged her not to ignore the connection he believed they shared. He wrote things like, "Your silence is destroying me. I'm living in a nightmare because of you, and you were the light, and now you've left me in the dark." His messages became increasingly intrusive, arriving at all hours of the day and night. Some began to take on an inappropriately suggestive tone with uncomfortable hints and fantasies that left Celeste feeling disturbed and fearful. Celeste and her mother went to their local police station to officially report the harassment and request protection. After hearing the complaint, the officer explained that there wasn't sufficient legal ground to take action. There had been no physical threats or contact, and although the messages were persistent, they didn't formally violate any specific laws. They were told simply to ignore the messages. This response left Celeste disheartened. She had hoped that involving the police might send a message to Luai that his behavior was unacceptable. But the situation, which was clearly affecting her mental well-being, wasn't being recognized as dangerous. Back home, she tried once again to block all possible avenues of contact, but Luai continued, sometimes messaging from fake names or pretending to reach out by mistake just to initiate interaction. Celeste's anxiety grew. Luai's next steps were impossible to predict. He hadn't made physical contact, but his online presence was constant. She began avoiding social media, limiting her visibility, and removing location tags. It was a forced effort to reduce his focus on her. But even with complete silence and digital isolation, he kept following her online. With every new message, it became clear to Celeste that this was no longer just obsessive. It was a full-blown fixation, detached from reality. Soon, Luai's tone shifted. He started accusing Celeste of not being as kind or genuine as he once believed. He wrote that she was just like everyone else, blaming her for giving him hope and walking away. The tone of his messages took on elements of emotional manipulation. He hinted at self-harm, writing things like, "Your silence is slowly killing me." In other messages, he claimed he still loved her, but was being forced to suffer because of her coldness. This emotional blackmail became a way for him to try to exert control. He wanted Celeste to feel guilty for his mental state. Celeste felt like the situation was slipping out of her hands. When she turned again to her family, her parents and brothers were fully united in their support. They urged her to demand that the police take action. Though Celeste was hesitant, recalling how her first report had been dismissed, this time she decided not to back down. She returned to the station with her mother. By that point, nearly a year had passed since the harassment began. Celeste presented screenshots of the messages, explained how the communication had shifted over time, showed how he kept creating new accounts, and detailed the psychologically disturbing tone of his words. She emphasized that she was living in constant fear and didn't know what might happen if the situation continued to be ignored. This time, a different officer received the report. He listened closely to Celeste and her mother, reviewed the evidence, and acknowledged that there was a genuine threat. A decision was made to file for a court-issued protective order. Shortly after, a judge granted the request. Luai Sako was legally prohibited from approaching Celeste Mano or contacting her in any form, including through electronic or digital means. Any violation of the order would result in criminal charges. This marked the first official step toward safeguarding Celeste. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of relief. The order was served to Luai, and he was formally warned of the legal consequences of breaking it. Following that, his activity came to a sudden halt. For several weeks, Celeste didn't receive a single message. The feeling of safety returned slowly. Celeste still feared that Luai might try to bypass the restriction, but the absence of new messages gave her hope that the situation might finally be under control. She began to resume her regular routine, spending more time with friends and loved ones and becoming active again on social media. Her emotional well-being started to improve. Despite this, Celeste couldn't shake the sense of ongoing danger. She knew that someone driven by obsession rarely accepts rejection without resistance. The court's decision limited Luai's actions, but it didn't guarantee her complete safety. She spoke to her family about her concerns, stressing that although the order was in place, it didn't mean he wouldn't try to find other ways to exert pressure. While the police intervention was a step forward, it came far too late. For nearly a year, Celeste had been left to deal with the harassment on her own, with little to no support from the system. Just a few weeks after the protective order took effect, in July 2020, Luai was spotted near Celeste's car in a parking lot outside her workplace. He wasn't just passing by. Witnesses stated that he stood near the vehicle, inspecting it intently, as though waiting for Celeste, or planning something. His presence clearly violated the terms of the restraining order, which barred him from coming near her. The incident was reported immediately to the authorities. Luai was detained and brought in. At the station, he was reminded of the court's restrictions and informed that violating the order was a criminal offense. In the state of Victoria, breaking a protective order can carry a maximum penalty of up to 10 years in prison. Yet, despite the clear breach, Luai was released with only a warning, and the incident was logged without further legal action. The case was not referred to court, and no steps were taken to restrict his movement. Celeste was notified about his release. Her reaction was immediate: fear, confusion, and a profound sense of vulnerability. She began to suspect that the legal system might be unable, or unwilling, to truly stop Luai, even with official mechanisms in place. A few days after his release, Luai sent Celeste a handwritten letter, a multi-page, informal document. In it, he demanded that she withdraw her complaint and blamed her for what he called his ruined life. He claimed he was the real target of harassment, called the order unjust, and suggested that everything happening was the result of her bias against him. Celeste herself refused to read the letter. Instead, she handed it over to the police, who interpreted its contents as yet another violation of the protective order. But instead of filing charges, officers questioned Luai once again. He denied any harmful intent, insisting he hadn't meant to cause distress and claiming his actions were simply an emotional response. He told investigators he wasn't a threat, that he was in emotional pain, and that he didn't understand why he was being treated as dangerous. Luai's behavior during the interview was marked by instability. He didn't deny his feelings toward Celeste, but tried to portray them as a natural expression of romantic interest. His statements contradicted logic, but despite this, he was released after questioning. A court hearing was scheduled, giving him the opportunity to contest the restraining order. Until that date, he remained free. Celeste was informed of his release and the upcoming hearing. After hearing the news, she began telling friends and colleagues that she feared for her life. She didn't believe the authorities could protect her if Luai decided to act. She didn't hide her anxiety and once said something that would later feel chillingly prophetic: "He's going to kill me." Her fear was grounded in everything that had happened up to that point, and the repeated inaction from the police, who had issued only verbal warnings despite clear violations. The restraining order felt like a formality, not real protection. Every effort Celeste made to seek stronger intervention was met with inaction. This marked a turning point. By the fall of 2020, the stalking that had lasted more than a year appeared to come to a halt. After the order was served and Luai was questioned again, all contact from him stopped. Celeste received no new messages. There were no sightings or attempts to approach her. It gave her a sense that maybe the most dangerous part was behind her. In November, as summer begins in Australia, Celeste felt confident enough to make her relationship with her boyfriend, Chris Ridsdale, public. On November 15, 2020, she posted a photo of the two of them on Instagram. They looked happy and relaxed. For Celeste, that image symbolized a fresh start, a life without fear, without control, without the constant presence of someone watching. She felt like she had reclaimed her space to simply be herself. But in reality, Luai's silence was deceptive. He hadn't let go of his fixation. He had simply changed tactics. Instead of messaging her directly, he started closely monitoring her digital footprint. He followed her social media posts, studied the backgrounds in her photos, and searched for recognizable landmarks and locations. Using the images, he cross-referenced scenery with satellite views on Google Earth and street maps. That's how he figured out the location of her parents' home. He drove past their house multiple times, observing the layout, the windows, fences, and the front of the building. He searched public sources for floor plans and architectural details. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. It was a calculated effort to gather as much information as possible about Celeste's private life. Amid this preparation, Luai began taking more concrete steps. As early as August, he had purchased a kitchen knife. Over the following months, he continued surveillance. Later data from his devices would reveal that he had studied the neighborhood's layout, examined the types of fencing, and researched potential ways to gain entry. The photo with Chris became an emotional trigger for Luai. During later interrogations, he admitted that the image made him feel humiliated and betrayed. Seeing Celeste happy beside another man, he interpreted it not as a reflection of her personal choice, but as a deliberate insult. To him, it was a provocation, something deeply personal and offensive. On the night of November 15th into the early hours of the 16th, Luai began preparing to act. He took with him a knife and a hammer. By the next morning, he would be in custody, but at that moment, no one realized that his silence had not meant acceptance, but planning. Early in the morning, on November 16th, 2020, Luai Sacco approached the Mano family home in a Melbourne suburb. It was approximately 4:10 a.m. He parked nearby, stepped out with the tools he had brought, and made his way to the backyard. According to investigators, he had studied the layout of the property in advance, including the placement of windows. That knowledge allowed him to move decisively. He climbed over the fence and approached Celeste's bedroom window. Everyone in the house was asleep. Celeste was in her room, and her mother was in the room next door. Using the hammer, Luai shattered the glass and climbed inside through the broken window. The noise woke Celeste's mother, who rushed toward her daughter's room. But in those few seconds, Celeste was already in grave danger. Luai launched the attack immediately upon entering. He inflicted at least 23 stab wounds. Celeste had no time to react or defend herself. The assault was rapid and deliberate. Forensic analysis later confirmed that most of the wounds were concentrated around the chest and neck. The entire incident lasted less than 3 minutes. By the time her mother entered the room, Celeste was already gone. Realizing what had happened, her mother rushed to her daughter, but it was too late. In a state of panic and shock, she contacted emergency services. Neighbors, having heard the screams and sound of breaking glass, also called the authorities. Security cameras on nearby properties captured Luai's escape. He fled the house the same way he came in, through the broken window, over the fence, and toward his vehicle. The footage shows him moving quickly, leaving a visible trail of blood, his movements rushed and disoriented. Instead of fleeing, Luai drove to the nearest police station. Upon arrival, he didn't confess to the crime. Instead, he began acting erratically, shouting, demanding that officers end it, and accusing law enforcement of being responsible for what had happened. He claimed their inaction had pushed him to the edge and made him lose control. At no point did he express remorse for the attack or attempt to deny involvement. Officers noticed he was covered in blood, visibly agitated, displaying nervous tics, and breaking down into tears. At that time, they had not yet been officially informed of the incident. But once the emergency call from Celeste's mother was relayed to the station, the situation became clear. Dispatch linked the man in the lobby to the tragedy that had just been reported. Luai was detained immediately, his clothing confiscated, and an initial interview was conducted. When the crime scene team arrived at the Mano family home, they found clear signs of forced entry, blood traces, and weapons that were later discovered in Luai's car. DNA analysis would later confirm that the biological evidence found on the weapon and on his clothing matched the victim. Fingerprints belonging to Luai were also found on the window frame, further confirming that he had entered the house. The evidence collected within the first 24 hours, including security footage, Luai's own statements, physical evidence, digital activity, and prior communications, formed the core of the case against him. Investigators had no doubt about Luai's involvement. Following Luai Sako's arrest, the investigation progressed rapidly. The evidence was overwhelming and clear. At first glance, it appeared that the case would move swiftly through the courts and that the sentencing would reflect the severity of the crime. But the process dragged on for nearly 3 years. During this time, Luai remained in pretrial detention and used every possible tactic to delay a final verdict. One of his earliest strategies was to claim mental instability. He alleged that his actions were not his own, but were influenced by an imaginary figure named Icha, a hallucinated entity with blade-like teeth that had supposedly controlled his mind. Luai told court-appointed psychiatrists that Icha had been sitting beside him in the car the night of the attack, urging him on. A panel of 4 forensic experts evaluated Luai and concluded that he did not suffer from psychotic disorders. The hallucinations, they determined, had been fabricated. However, they did diagnose him with severe personality issues, including low tolerance for frustration, intense reactions to rejection, obsessive thinking, and a tendency to interpret events as personal offenses. Despite these traits, the experts agreed that he was legally sane and fully responsible for his actions. After this defense failed, Luai shifted strategies. He admitted to the act itself, but began disputing the details. He claimed he had only stabbed Celeste twice, suggesting that the rest of the injuries may have come from broken glass. This version directly contradicted the forensic report, which documented 23 stab wounds, none of which could be explained by glass shards. Medical experts had no doubt. The weapon had been used repeatedly and intentionally. In May 2023, after exhausting efforts to avoid accountability, Luai entered a guilty plea. Yet, even at this stage, he continued to provoke. On the eve of the trial, he dismissed his legal counsel and chose to represent himself. This decision gave him the right to directly question witnesses, including the forensic examiner, about the details of Celeste's injuries. His courtroom behavior, especially when discussing the fatal wounds, was seen by the Mano family as a form of psychological harassment. Her parents and brothers were forced to sit through the disturbing analysis of what injuries had been fatal, narrated by the person responsible. On May 25, 2023, Judge Jane Dixon announced the sentence. Prosecutors had sought life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, citing the extreme brutality of the crime, the prolonged stalking, and the violation of an active protective order. However, the court sentenced Luai to 36 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 30 years. The key factor for the reduced sentence was the court's assessment that Luai had a limited ability to regulate his behavior at the time of the offense, a psychological consideration, despite his legal sanity. The decision sparked an emotional reaction from Celeste's family. Her mother, Agi Mano, told reporters that she felt the sentence was a betrayal of her daughter's memory. She expressed disbelief that the court showed compassion to someone who had repeatedly violated boundaries and ultimately committed a violent act. In her words, Luai deserved no sympathy or leniency, as he had never shown a shred of remorse, guilt, or respect for human life. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.